He was sunny, and he would say, "Put your little hand in mine," and I would put my little hand in his, which I think is very emblematic of the mentor-protege relationship.
That didn't happen. I mean, it was funny because it was like we were singing the song, but totally oblivious to one another, like physically, like just kind of wandering around in different places, not paying any attention to the other.
Like we are now.
Yeah, just totally alone and glorying in your part.
This is Arts Educators Save the World, where successful artists and their mentors talk about how arts education transformed their lives. Hey, welcome back to Arts Educators Save the World, a podcast where artists and their mentors talk about the impact of arts education on both their lives. And today we have an exciting pair for you. We are talking to two poets, which is a new pairing for us, a new art form for us. And I'm excited to let you all know that my amazing producer, Doug, is who turned me on to the poets that we're going to hear from today. And so, Doug, hi, first of all. How are you?
Oh, hi, Erica. I'm good.
Oh, hi.
How are you?
Good. I'm great. It's my 50th birthday tomorrow.
I know.
So
it's crazy.
Happy birthday to me.
Happy birthday to you.
Crazy. Happy birthday to me. Half century.
I beat you there a long time ago.
You did? Oh, we won't tell the people.
I'm still pretending I'm still 50.
Great. Pretend. I feel great about being 50, by the way.
I like being 50.
I feel like I'm like right in the middle of my life. And that feels really exciting to me.
Yeah.
So all of our younger listeners, fear not. 50 is not the end of your life.
50 is the new 30.
That's right. That's what they say for us Gen X kids, right? Don't they say like Gen Xers are 45 to 55, feel 35 to whatever. I don't know.
35 to 36.
It's a meme. Great. Perfect. We're all 35 to 36. So Doug, tell me, what made you bring these poets to the show? What made you think that this would be an exciting conversation for us to have and for our listeners to be a part of?
So ever since I've known my wife, both before and after we were married, she has had a copy of of 4 books in the bathroom wherever we lived. 3 of them are Art Spiegelman doodle books. It's a collection called B&Os. They're wonderful. And the 4th one is this book called Letters to Wendy's. And I had no idea I knew who Spiegelman was. I had no idea what this other book was. It's by a guy named Joe Wenderoth. And when I asked her about it a long time ago, she was like, oh yeah, there was a guy in my cohort, my PhD cohort in English at UCLA who worked with him. And he gave me a copy of this book. I was like, oh. And so over the years, I go back and I read this book randomly because it's just in the bathroom and I'm there every day. It's really weird and really singular. And so I was like, I'm going to reach out to the guy from her cohort and see if he can get Joe to come on. And I did. And it was surprisingly very easy. They were both ready and willing to yammer and yammer about what a poem is and how you get there. And I thought it was kind of great.
I thought it was fantastic. And I'm excited for listeners to think about poetry both as an opportunity for becoming an art maker, which is sort of mostly what we talk about, but also the metaphors about arts and learning that these guys introduce that are sort of poetic by nature. It's like very meta. There's a lot of really cool meta discussion.
They're definitely poets.
Yes, exactly. Poets through and through. Everyone enjoy this poetic conversation about poetry with Jason Morphew and Joe Wenderoth.
Our first guest, Jason Morphew, is the author of the poetry collections Eject City and Dead Boy. He's also the author of the chapbooks What to Deflect When You're Deflecting and In Order to Commit Suicide. His poems have been published in Seneca Review, Lana Turner, Bellevue Literary Review, and Smartish Pace, among other journals. His essays and reviews have been published in the Daily Beast, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Publishers Weekly, and the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, among other magazines and newspapers. He's sold one screenplay and written a dozen others, while continuing to ghostwrite celebrity memoirs and edit novels on a frantic freelance basis. Morphew started life in a mobile home in Pike County, Arkansas. He earned a BA in English Literature from Yale University, an MA in Creative Writing from the University of California, Davis, and a PhD in English Renaissance Literature from the University of California, Los Angeles. Morphew is a singer-songwriter and a ghostwriter. He teaches at Stanford Online High School and lives with his family in Los Angeles. When he's exhausted, Dr. Morphew watches the dumbest TV he can find. Lately, that means Family Feud, whose scoring system he challenges anyone to explain. Jason, Dr. Morphew, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. One of my wife's friends produces the Celebrity Family Feud competitions, and even she can't explain. I've asked her recently to explain how the scoring works on Family Feud, and she can't explain it. And they never I've never seen a game show where they don't explain how the scoring works at the beginning really quickly. They don't do it for Family Feud either. I don't think they know.
Yeah, they might not.
I think it's according to who Steve likes, which family Steve prefers, I'm going to read, about 5 years ago, I can't believe it's been that much time, but I wrote an essay about letters to Wendy's, which is one of Joe's books. And I thought I would read the opening paragraph to introduce him. No book has affected my life like Letters to Wendy's has. Its excerpts in Harpers magazine shocked me back to liking poetry. Its brilliance led me to meet its author at the performance space Red Cat in Los Angeles. Meeting its author led me to study with him at UC Davis. Studying with him led me to my wife, my children, my PhD, and a 16 years long friendship with Joe Wenderoth. At this point now, it's 21 years. I've given copies of Letters to Wendy's to friends and lovers. I've taught it to undergraduates at UCLA and UC Davis. I've had students put the speaker of Letters to Wendy's on trial to determine whether he should be exiled from the state. I've brought Joe in to speak to my students. I've listened to his book and let it lead me. Joe even officiated my wedding. On my marriage license, where it asks him to list his religion, he writes TV. I give you Joe Wenderoth.
Hello.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today. Jason, you sort of teed this up with your beautiful reading of your introduction. I always like to start these conversations by having the two of you reflect on the first time you remember working together. You started us with how you met Joe, but I'm curious about your memories of the first time you really remember working through on an idea, a piece of writing together.
Well, the first time working together actually would not have been on a poem. There was a recruitment weekend for UC Davis where they put you up in a motel. I think they pay your airfare. And I went up and stayed with Joe. I think I actually slept in his guest room. And so that's the first time really hanging out with him. And the first thing we did was he wanted me to take the guitar. I don't know if I was using his guitar or mine, and play a Willie Nelson song that he wanted to sing, Pretend I Never Happened. And so he said, we just sat on his couch in Davis, California. And I didn't do great. I think he wanted me to play like the lead part also, but I didn't know it. I was just kind of playing the chords. And he sang Pretend I Never Happened. And that's the first time we worked on something creatively. And then poetry workshop, creative writing grad program that fall, I was writing strange. I was writing sort of blank verse formal poems, and Joe wasn't digging it. And so that was sort of disabusing me of writing in form as one of my earliest memories of working with Joe.
Well, it was rhyme.
I was rhyming too.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was hard. I mean, I'm a songwriter, and it's hard. I mean, that's a weird transition to make. It's a safe space, I guess, rhyme for a songwriter. And letting go of that is, I think, was difficult for me. I was pretty insecure starting out there in that program. Joe has a great baritone, so he sings that song really well, especially.
How do you decide, Joe, when to kind of take a student, a graduate student, and think about engaging them in that kind of mentorship process? I mean, you know, I also teach at a university, and I've worked with undergrads and PhD students, and the PhD student relationship is hugely intimate and it's an extensive commitment, right, to another human being, not just their artistic creative potential, but their human potential. How do you decide when to bring someone in?
Well, it's just your own interest, I guess, or my own. You know, I'm not in creative writing. You're not really. There's no. You know, it's not math, and it's not. It's free in a certain way. It's what I want to say. It's not based on a didactic of prudence, I guess. Alan Grossman termed it, what did he say? Poetry or art is a didactic of eidetic exemplification, which is to say the eidos being the person or the countenance of a person. So art being like the how to show a person. And like, so showing a person could be so many different things, you know, it's so many, but very few people can do it very well. I was thinking about poetry recently, and I was thinking how to, like, because I haven't written it really for quite a while, because I've been absorbed in a huge project that, anyway, so I got away from poetry writing, but it's, when I look back at it now and hear sort of the person that those poems are, because I think each poem is like a person, essentially. It's just a person that can't change, a person that can kind of live as long as the language. So I was thinking about what are these, like, so you get to be almost 60 and retired. And so as looking back now, and I have just, I don't know, a finite amount of, 60 poems maybe that I would stand behind that are like my work, or like something my being a midwife to those words, just those words, just that point, that, and when I look back at that, I think, what is that? And I thought maybe a good way to describe it is to say everything in my life, in my whole life, every part of it is a complete absurd ridiculousness. It's just ridiculous. And these moments of where that voice, that's like just the few seconds of grace that I could find out of the confusion and nausea,
There are so many things that you said that resonate with me, particularly with my research life. So I've done a lot of research on how young people make art, whether that's write and perform plays, produce short films, create digital art as vehicles for identity making, right? So teenagers who are often tasked with having to figure out how to become human beings while they're participating in these kinds of arts and educational practices. And one of my great colleagues, a professor at UC Berkeley, her name is Glinda Hull, was doing research on digital story making with teenagers in like the late 90s and early 2000s, before that was super easy to do and popular. And she produced all this incredible research with teenagers where they produced digital stories. And then maybe 5 years later or so, she went back and had those same kids who were maybe 13 at the time that they produced those things, had them go back and rewatch these digital stories. And to a person, they were horrified because, as you said, you know, these pieces of art are people that can't change. And the can't change-ness of that felt, you know, for 18-year-olds, felt humiliating, right? Felt disingenuous, felt as if they had betrayed themselves somehow by capturing who they were then that would live for all time as who they are. And I love your reflection that if a person can look at those people that can't change over the course of a life, over the course of a career, you have a different response to it. You know, you maybe have a different response to those people that can't change. I don't know if, you know, you said there's sort of 60 poems that you stand by, I mean, ish. Are there poems that you are horrified by for that reason? Like this person that can't change is not in this oeuvre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here and there, you know, and especially if you go way back to the beginning and look at the first efforts and everything. But another point, you know, Jason was talking about letters to Wendy's, and I really don't think of those as poems, really. That's not kind of how you know, I'm not against the idea that they are, or, you know, it's all just a matter of what argument comes out of it or that you can make. But yeah, thinking about my poems are sort of different from, they're tragedy, straight tragedy. Letters to Wendy's is more of a tragic comedy, you know, so in the tragic comedy is the very core of it is you hear in Beckett, which is, I can't go on, I'll go on. So, you know, every time you get to that, I can't go on, the comedy part is that you do go on, you know, like, and that you're made a fool of in that way, or over and over. So I kind of was inhabiting a different space in doing those. And yeah, actually I haven't read that book in a while, or sometimes I'm away from it for a while and then I'll see it and I pick it up. I mean, like 5 years, say, and look at it and I'm surprised by things in it, you know. I'm like, wow, this is pretty good. You know, like there are things in there that just feel really foreign to me. Like, where did that come? How did that? And I have another book of letters to Wendy's supposed to come out. It's been being held up for forever, but eventually will come out, and I'll be curious to see what people think of that book, because it seems like such a bad idea to do more. But the pure fact of it was that I enjoyed doing it. So it's like a Sudoku or whatever. Just you sit there and it's like some statement comes out, and then you have this challenge of like how to unfold or escape that, or in this limited space. Yeah, I just enjoyed doing those and wound up accumulating a bunch again, and then set my mind to it and kind of, but I'm sure they're different. The new one's called Letters to Wendy's from Further In. So that phrase from further in is important to kind of how I think about it.
Lots of thoughts listening. You can see why I dropped everything and ran to UC Davis, just listening to Joe talk about things. This genre issue with Letters to Wendy's it's funny. I've learned to think about genre and find it fascinating and useful as a teaching device and as a thinking device. But when I first I came across that clutch of letters to Wendy's in Harpers magazine in like year 2000 or 1999, whatever year that was. I didn't worry that it was prose. They were short and poetic. I am a sucker for someone who's really funny, and Joe is really funny, and those letters to Wendy's are extremely funny. So I think all that put together appealed to me in some way that I didn't need to. I didn't need a generic designation to give me permission to fall in love with them. They felt poetic and funny, and that was enough for me. And I needed that at that time. I mean, really thinking about it saved my life in some really practical ways. So, but I have been embarrassed to have it pointed out to me, these aren't even poems, dumbass, which is also useful. And I've gone on in my foolish comedic way. And I was just thinking, like what Joe's talking about with early poems that you don't like or you don't feel are strong enough to be people quite, like they're sort of half-formed beings or something, however Joe imagines them. And then I'll go on. And putting that together with the students who were horrified by their 18-year-old digital stories. I mean, I think that's the difference between people who need to make stories and poems and maybe people who don't. I mean, I get horrified at my very public failures, but I do feel the need to go on and and it is foolish. And the hope is that you will make some fully formed people along the way in the forms of poems or essays or songs. I don't really write songs anymore. Yeah, letters. I wrote this long essay. I think the only thing that's useful from it is the introductory paragraph, because it's a little too close to me. I think still, letters to Wendy's. It's so funny and so rich, and it does reward repeated readings because there's a lot going on intellectually in that book and philosophically. And the more I've learned. Just from literary theory and literary criticism, I go back and I can recognize little pieces of little allusions now that I wasn't able to before. So that's sort of my favorite book, and I'm very inarticulate when describing it.
Did your experience with the book lead you to apply to work with Joe?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you come to that? In other words, I've had that experience with books or, episodes of television shows or, pieces of story that have changed the way I think about myself and the way I want to engage with the world. Mm-hmm. Never have I ever then said, mm-hmm. Let me go and find this person and, have a series of mentorship interactions with them to guide my own practice. So how did you get there?
Yeah, it reminds me, I read an interview with the poet James Dickey not long ago where he said something like, if I knew there was a piece of film of John Keats, it was like 3 seconds long, I would crawl naked over broken glass for 100 miles to get to it. It's a little bit like that, but the first part of that answering that question is I didn't know it was possible when I first read the excerpts. I just knew I had to have the book. But then later, in the mailbox in this little guest room shack where I was living in Los Feliz, Los Angeles, came a mailer from Red Cat. This is a little black box theater in the Disney Music Center in downtown LA. And they have really cool experimental art performances. And it was advertising Joe reading with Matthew Zapruder interviewing at the end. And I couldn't believe it. And so got tickets, went down there. And in the course of the interview process, I learned that he was he taught at UC Davis. And from there, I was just, well, the next 25 years of my life, I guess I could hear it sort of clicking into place. So yeah, it was just that process of just being in love with the book and reading Joe's poems and then getting that brochure. And then during this conversation with Matthew Zapruder, he talked about teaching. And I was around 30, 31, so I was still in the range where that was, I guess, a thing I could do. And my music career was, I wasn't making any money anymore from it. I was still doing it, but I was going further and further into debt, and I was in a kind of desperate situation. So the way people come to Jesus, I'm in the South, and so I see all these billboards that are clearly appealing to people who are in a dark place in their lives. I was ready. I needed a big change, and when he mentioned that he teaches at UC Davis, I went. He thought I was affiliated with the art school. I don't know if it's Otis or what art school is affiliated with the Red Cat, but he signed my book. I was wearing house shoes or slippers. We call them house shoes in the South. And he complimented my slippers. He said he had a pair just like them. And I emailed him and applied to UC Davis. I would send him poems, and he suggested books to read. A lot of Paul Celan, and I got in, and so then I was off. And he even told me what town to live in, and I followed that advice and lived in Winters, California, outside of Davis, in a little farmhouse, a little guest house on a farm.
Joe, how did you come to teaching?
There's really no other option. What are you going to do if you're a poet? You're okay. How many poems have I sold this month? How much food do I need? Let's see. This isn't working. So they have this whole industry, this weird industry of so-called teaching creative writing. Like you could tell somebody, I don't think I believe that it's possible to teach them. I mean, I believe, in any kind of positive or direct way, you can't really, but if someone is making an effort, you can react to and, kind of guide in a certain way by reacting to what they're doing. It's a difficult thing to talk about. I think Dickinson's phrase, none may teach it, 'tis the seal despair. So she's saying basically that you can't be taught poetry or what poetry is or how to feel, how to have it happen through you. You can't be taught that. The seal for that, the thing that has to be broken or really there is despair, is authentic despair. That's the source of the poem. So yeah, I mean, I took it always with a grain of salt, I guess, I didn't think of teaching as, I guess it's very important to talk about all these things and all, but at the same time, there's no it's not like any of the other disciplines where it's very guided in a certain way. I keep coming back. I think one of my things that got me in, that probably was appealing to people, I'm a person as a teacher, and I'm there as a person as a teacher. And so if you're going to know me, I need to reveal myself to a certain degree. That's just how I conceived of the creative writing community, was that it should be more just like a community, just like people are welcome in it. They support one another and everything. They try to be honest. They're all, when you take that and then think about that in a larger kind of context, like, should we have this industry sort of thing? I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts.
One of the things that listeners of this podcast will know, because they've heard it on repeat, is one of my core features of teaching that has emerged out of my years of both arts practice and also working with artists is the idea that a classroom is fundamentally a place where we have to scaffold risk-taking, that learning anything requires taking a risk. And as you say, making art, especially personal art, is the riskiest of activities. And you can't just walk into a space with other people and say, take a risk, here you go. You have to scaffold that opportunity for them. And one of the things I hear you saying, Joe, is that kind of one of your primary strategies for that was your own kind of self-declarations of your own humanity, right? That if you can declare your humanity, then others will feel free to do the same, or may feel free to do the same, and that's the Dickinson seal, right? Is the willingness to share your own humanity. And I will say that even if that doesn't feel like a teaching strategy to you, maybe, I would say that's one of the hardest things to be successful at as a teacher, and one of the things that we don't teach enough of in teacher school and we should do more of, which is the importance of scaffolding risk-taking and the strategies for doing so to open up possibilities for others.
I would differentiate the teacher person from the artist person. So, I think you're right. It is a teaching strategy more so because it's more associated with that person. I'm not the sort of person who would, my art is not like that.
Right.
It's not kind of manipulative in that way. Anyway.
Pedagogical, manipulative, tomato.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, too, that some people simply can't do it.
Yeah.
That you could sit there forever and they cannot, to make a painting, for instance, you just make a painting. There are some people who would be like, of what? Or what do you, they would have to be told, what is how, no, they don't. I think that's interesting in and of itself, that the species kind of thrives with these, there's only a sector of it that has that capability to kind of, and so when you make it into a profit thing or an industry, so then you've got all these people, some of which, can't do it at all. And that was always interesting to me, to be in a workshop with people who are writing poems that they're just hilarious, and I don't know if that's, I'm laughing with you, not at you, or I don't know. Some poems are so funny.
I just keep thinking about the seal, despair, because I think there are other ways to read it. I mean, it was interesting. I was kind of astonished and gasped a little bit when Joe immediately went to breaking the seal, that being the necessary part of being a poet. Because I think, I emphasize how funny the letters to Wendy's are as the thing that appealed to me. But there is a kind of seal despair on them, and on Joe's poems that also appealed to me. And I think when we're talking about pedagogy and what draws proteges to mentors, you're looking for, I think there's an instinctive sense that this aesthetic or this spirit of work is going to help me, and it's going to mean something to me, it's going to matter to me to be around it and to orbit it, and to orbit this mind and this imagination and this spirit. And there's a kind of emblematic seal of despair there that I think resonated or rhymed with my seal despair as a kind of marker And I think that that's a big part of it too. I needed to be around art and an invitation or a pathway, and I knew it would probably involve teaching, and it has. That was not going to be cringe-worthy on a soul level. I needed it to be compelling and to feel like it wasn't, like it was, the stakes were as high as they could possibly be, and that we weren't, goofing around here with poetry and with words. And that was a seal that I recognized, and I think instinctively compelled me to want to work with Joe.
There's always a proof required, or Jason's being a singer and performer, so there's that kind of presence of like it. The thing that I think the industry doesn't bring up enough is the question of, does this poem work? It's a very simple question. Does this poem work? If you were reading this poem to an auditorium of people and they're listening, would it work? Would it do anything to them? Would it work? And we can test that too, because we have our little community and we have our little readings and we get together, and that's great because it's like a proving grounds. You get up there and, people, you could do your slam thing if you like, and that's a certain kind of song and dance. But if you get up there and just read your poems, which is another whole question, like figuring out how to read your poems, that took me years to figure out how to read my own poems, like out loud. And to cut to the end, I figured out that it's the voice of the poem that you have to let speak. You can't do anything to it. If you try to, manipulate it. And I did something funny one time at Jason's farmhouse, actually. There was a party there, and we were doing reading. And for my part of the reading, I read Wallace Stevens' Sunday Morning, the poem. And but I shouted it, the whole poem. I just was enthusiastically belting it out. And it was a very liberating and hysterical experience. But at the same time, I felt like the poem couldn't be defeated, meaning I could mock it all I like, but still what the words were saying was kind of leaking through to some degree, And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it was.
But yeah, that's something similar to the world that Jason was coming from, is you make a song and then it's like a question of, does it work? Means, is somebody going to sign you? Is somebody going to buy the records or whatever? Is it, and same thing, I think the reason it's not the same with poems is because poems are all subsidized. There's all the magazines they're not making money. Poem. What situation is with poems.
Earlier in the conversation, Jason, you had mentioned, I don't know if genre is the word that you used, but you had sort of mentioned your own transition from writing like a songwriter to writing like a poet. First of all, that makes me think of this sound conversation, and also takes me back a little bit to Joe, your assertion that kind of this can't be taught. And I guess I'm curious about these maybe teachable, for lack of a better word, aspects of different sound that are embedded in different ways of making poems. And both, I don't know whether either of you think about that as makers or as teachers.
I think it's really simple. You just do it. So if I read a poem to you and it does something, I think that's what the canon is. It's just poems that have kind of done weird things to people. And, people are like, whoa, that's kind of, and so this community kind of keeps its own record. I think it's gotten more complicated now because, I don't know, because of the industry and because now you give permission to tens of thousands of people to call themselves poets. in a way that in, say, 1920, that just wasn't done. If you were a poet and you were we knew who the poets were, and they had nothing to do with teaching. So, yeah, as far as teaching the difference, I would talk a lot about the difference between songwriting. I think great songwriting and great poetry are just very different things. And that's something I recall talking about with Jason early on, was just like, when you take great songs and you put them on the page as poems and say, let's read this as a poem, it sounds kind of corny or kind of too, I don't know, it doesn't do the same thing exactly. And the other thing I recall thinking about is the fact that, so when I started kind of trying to make music of my own, because that was totally foreign to me, I felt like I can sing a song that somebody's written, but the idea that I could create the song, there's no way, I don't know how that happens, so but when I started to try to make kind of music on my laptop and whatnot and putting in the voice stuff, it had nothing. The primary thing was how does it sound? Like, as in, does it sound good? Does it sound cool? Basically. Because if it doesn't matter what the content of the words are. It's because you failed the first thing. And, so, like, can't touch that. Can't touch this.
Yeah. When I teach my students, my creative writing students, teaching at a younger age, middle school and high school, I ask them to surprise the reader. And I think that always involves sound, especially with poetry. Surprise me, surprise your reader. I think you're talking about scaffolding, Erica. I think that is one key aspect, because a lot of my students want to write about a really meaningful experience that happened to them. And that's wonderful. And I love to encourage that. And these kids have so much anxiety and other things going on that's enough as an experience. But in order to kick it up into a poetic realm, something more ambitious, something more moving, meaningful, I do ask them to think about surprising the reader. And that usually involves the music of the piece. So that would be my very basic sort of teaching answer.
Yeah, I remember I did I did this like a class basically during the semester on Ceylon, but it was on Ceylon and Hank Williams, because I thought it was interesting that they were of the same generation. It really don't seem that way if you think about them. They don't, but they're exactly the same age basically, and you see kind of one going into this career of songwriting and the other becoming the great poet. And so we would alternate back and forth between like these Hank Williams songs and Ceylon poems. And I think we did some Jesus and Mary Chain poems too, because I think that the speaker in those poems articulates a kind of something like the lyric cell, like CELL. What Grossman calls the lyric cell is just the space out of which the lyric speech that we've kept has come. That's where it comes from. So that just occurred to me. I forgot about that sort of, and probably 14, 15 people in that kind of gathering, and we would just gather once a week and talk about these Ceylon poems and Hank Williams songs, and then go to the bar, and so it's just like a community.
Mm-hmm. It was beautiful. I loved that class.
I am wondering, Jason, how you translate some of these ideas to working with young people, because I think so much of what you're describing is not only, it diminishes, I think, the depth of how you both are capturing what poetry is by saying it's abstract, but also it seems to require a level of life experience that being 12 just doesn't have.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious how you translate that into your work with young folks who have just not lived the life that maybe they need to live to understand that poetry doesn't describe an event, it tries to be it.
Yeah, well, I model that priority, that's what poetry is ultimately, but I don't bash mere expressions of experience. I give feedback in the moment and in writing that encourages, like, what if you did this here right at the end? Wouldn't that's kind of kick it up into something else? I make those kinds of suggestions, but I am very grateful that there are students who are interested in learning about poetry and want to give it a shot. And so I try to just be encouraging and model certain aesthetics and guidelines. For the first time this year, I have a student in my creative writing class, middle school class, who refuses all suggestions during workshop. It's very charming. She says, no, this is how I wrote the poem. This is how it was. I have faithfully represented the experience, and I am done. And no matter what any student or what I suggest, she rejects it all in this unbelievably confident way. No. She just says, no, the poem is finished. It's been really great.
I think there's two realms. Like you're talking about, you said they're interested in poetry, like the history of poetry. So you could take they're interested in poetry as like they're interested in what poetry has actually been so far. Or you could say that poetry is what could happen right now, or what is happening right now that we're writing. But anyway, the one project is basically, I don't know, like, so Jason went to get a PhD in literature. And so when you're teaching literature, they don't teach it quite the same way as poets, but in the creative writing sort of context. When creative writing teachers look at Keats or whatever they choose to look at from, I think they're doing a different thing, and I'm not quite sure how to articulate it. Doesn't it feel like a different thing to you? You know what I'm talking about, Jason?
Yeah, and I think that's a useful, like, that difference is very useful. By the way, during that same first meeting with Joe, when he sang Pretend I Never Happened, really beautiful, and I was distracted from my guitar playing because he was singing it so well, by Willie Nelson, which is such a great song. And it's got the seal of despair on it. We were talking, just sort of shooting the breeze about other students there, and Joe mentioned one student named Dylan, since become a good friend of mine, Dylan Godwin. He said, Dylan's really smart. He could do a PhD. And it was not on my radar. It was not anywhere in my imagination that I would ever go on to do a PhD. It was like, that's something that is, I guess, advisable, something to do. So that was the first inkling or idea I ever had of perhaps getting a PhD, was that moment with Joe saying, well, that guy's really smart. He could do it. So, that's what smart people do? Yeah, but it's really useful to have this separate. I mean, I think it's really useful to compartmentalize poetry away from these other disciplines, which is a Foucauldian, idea of like the discipline of it all.
I love a podcast where somebody drops Foucault right in the middle of telling a story. It
seemed like it was time. We're talking about PhDs. I like protecting poetry for that reason. I like keeping it off, away from these other modes.
Who's the guy that you studied in graduate school, PhD wise?
You mean like what I wrote my dissertation about, Petrarch?
Yeah, Petrarch. Yes. That's right. So I thought kind of the way that you described Petrarch, just it kind of reminded me of the process of your own creative writing, or like how your voice, poetic voice actually started to come out and become kind of this, I don't know, like this witness almost to something, an attempt to witness something. Anyway, I felt like somehow the way you were describing the PhD, the work you were doing there, as connected to that type of voice that you yourself have as an artist, separate from as a scholar.
Last question, if I may, and this may sound a little pedantic given the conversation we were just having, but I'm curious how each of you, how you've been successful as a teacher of creative practice. So when, you have both mentored many, many, many people, and including one another, how do you know that mentorship has helped to make a change?
I guess just when you read the new work. But I like the idea of the you hear people say that, we need to strive for change, right? And I like that because it just, the implications are that everything's fucked, like, just basically, and that any kind of change is improvement,
At all.
Yeah. So it's like, let's make a change. Okay. Yeah. So what I'll say is, when you're in the situation I was in, the creative writing world, and what you're kind of expected to do and can do in that space 20 years ago, very different from what you could do now, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when I think about that space, what I was going to say is that you're faced with kind of defining the whole world, like what you're doing. It's almost like Dungeons and Dragons, creative writing. You can just come in and, like, I'm the dungeon master, and I'm going to lead you through these adventures. So we're going to go over to this bar first. We're going to, so-and-so has got mushrooms. So-and-so has got, and you go through the adventures, and like the writing is something that just kind of comes out of that, or it's coming along with it. But it's, so making the changes, like, I don't know what's going on around me necessarily. For all those years, I was more focused just on this little world of people that I knew and worked with. And we would, as far as like playing music or having readings of things, or reading other authors and everything. So I made my own change in that, somehow, to make a positive or a good experience. I don't know. But I have a hard time connecting it to anything outside of it, though, as though it had any kind of political impact. That might be wrong. I might just be like not thinking about all the people who leave it and go elsewhere and what they take from it, and where, so if you think of it like a virus, or, like a, maybe, but Jason.
A rhizome.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I think that's lovely. Think about it as a virus. I don't, my students tell me, and they come, the students who really respond to what we're doing in class come to my office hours and hang out and show me things they're writing, or their parents will write to me and say, explain to me that this student has felt encouraged and seen in a way that they weren't before. I've only been teaching full time for 2 years. I've been off and on since 2017. So none of my students have published books of poems, and I've had students publish poems. But it's a lot of leaning on me for recommendations and advice, and I can tell that something has happened, something has resonated in class with them. It's just a feeling, because they're younger. I hope, I hope Joe likes the new book. I hope his influence is all over it.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
both of you have talked about, and in your answers just now, talked about how you see success essentially in the things that people make. And so it's not necessarily some external validation other than, no, the success is in the creation of these people. And I'm never going to not think about poems as people from now on. And in the creation of these people.
I would add that a person is like a little arc of time, like a person being like not only the time that it takes to speak the poem, but I mean like that what the poem is about, like we were talking about the word about the house, like, so that's a little arc of time, I think.
Joe's mentioned a couple times that we would go to karaoke often after a workshop or discussion of Paul Celan, Alan Grossman. Our showstopper, what Joe and I would do, our song together was "I Got You, Babe."
Who's Sonny and who's Cher?
Well, he was Sonny, and he would say, "Put your little hand in mine," and I would put my little hand in his, which I think is very emblematic of the mentor-protege relationship.
Yeah, but no, there was no that didn't happen. I mean, like it was funny because it was like we were singing the song, but totally oblivious to one another, like physically. Like just kind of wandering around in different places, not paying any attention to the other. And so
like we are now.
Yeah, just totally alone and, glorying in your part. That connection between the karaoke, I don't know, there's something about it. I'm sure if I thought about it long enough, it just seems really rich with meaning. The fact that after you're in this academic situation, that you go out into public where your voice you have to endure people. Some people have good voice, some people don't. And anyway, it's just interesting to me that kind of to be pushed into public like that, like, or to, make it into something part of a life.
It is so interesting to me to listen to two people who are teachers by profession, but who maybe don't consider teaching their core personality trait,
right,
wrestle with what teaching is and what teaching means, and to reflect on what it is they do almost by nature. I mean, Jason, obviously now as a high school teacher and having been a college teacher, has more experience with thinking about how he approaches teaching. But it's always fascinating to me to hear somebody who's clearly an expert teacher, but who hasn't really reflected on that in any substantive way, articulate a philosophy of teaching, essentially, and a philosophy of teaching poetry. I mean, I wrote down, that he said, each poem is like a person that can't change.
Yeah.
And this idea that to make poetry is to create people that are us but not us, but that are fixed in time.
Right.
And that what you're trying to teach somebody is how to create those people, I think is such a gorgeous metaphor for the art of teaching itself, but also specifically for the art of teaching creative practice.
Yeah. Yeah, that one, that sentence hit me and stuck with me since we sat down and talked with Jason and Joe. Like, poems as people that can't change.
And in my own work, I've done a lot of research on how identity development, how representations of identity are embedded in arts practices, particularly with young people, when we sort of consider identity development to be a task of adolescence, right? When you're 14 through 24, we think and talk a lot about identity development. And so I've looked a lot at how that happens in the context of arts practices, and to hear it laid out so directly and so clearly is really like my nerd research heart gets pumping a little as I think about how that translates into the kind of research studies and research practice that I do and that my colleagues do in the literacy fields, right? How we think about literacy as identity making, and also in arts fields and how we think about arts practices as identity making.
Yeah.
Those are my nerd thoughts.
I have a question for you that is related to the idea of poems as people.
Great. Lay it on me.
What are the names of the 3 poems that would represent who you were as a person in middle school, high school, and college?
Great. The title of the poem or the name of the person? The title of the poem.
The title of the poem can be the name of the person.
Great. Let's go with first. So my first one is sitting under the piano, trying not to interrupt anyone.
That's middle school?
That's one. Yep, that's middle
school.
One
thing. Okay. I like that.
I'm going to go with one that's kind of like college, emerging adulthood.
You could do college and then graduate school, or college and professional too, if you want to adjust the parameters.
So one is sitting under the piano, trying not to interrupt anyone.
One thing.
2, the littlest Jew.
2.
And my third is 50-year-old soul.
3 things. So good. Erica.
I hope you look forward to my poetry collection coming.
I'm dying. Can I pre-order that?
I've never written a poem in my life. Yes. I will say more on the littlest Jew off mic. That was a nickname I had for a very long time.
Yeah.
So,
You're not a towering person.
No, I'm not. And I am Jewish, so that is also accurate. I have a question for you.
Oh, boy.
What are 3 ways that our listeners can be involved in the magic that is Arts Educators Save the World?
One way would be to subscribe, and follow us wherever you're listening to your podcasts or social media where you may or may not follow us. Do that.
1.
You can go visit our website. It's Arts Educators Podcast. You can even submit ideas for guests. We've actually got some pretty cool ideas that we are in process on. So that would be really, really cool.
2.
You can also just write to us or leave comments, but you can use our email address, artseducatorspodcast@gmail.com, and let us know what you think.
3 things. What a delightful day with you, Doug. Onward together.
Arts Educators Save the World is hosted by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and produced and co-hosted by me, Alec Lev. Our executive producer is Doug Matica, and our audio producer is Justin Asher. Special thanks to our collaborators, the brilliant and talented Kate Baldwin, and our great friends at Story Pirate Studios, Lee Overtree, Benjamin Salka, and Amy Fiore. Original music is by Dan Lipton, and our artwork is by Lyra Evans. Check out our website designed by Cole Locasio at www.artseducatorspodcast.com. We're on Instagram at Arts Educators Podcast, and you can write to us with your questions and comments at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com. You can also find us at a place called YouTube. And wherever you're listening, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps the show. We're proud to be sponsored in part by the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Gibb Faculty Fellowship. Arts Educators Save the World was created by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and Alec Lev.